Learning through play starts with Lego Duplo. With Lego Duplo, toddlers can develop real-life skills while having fun with colorful bricks made just for them. Large, easy to grip, and safe to explore. When children express themselves with Lego Duplo, they build patience, problem-solving, and empathy. See your child learn perseverance and self-expression with everything they imagine and create. Visit lego.com/preschool to learn more.
At Blinds.com, it's not just about window treatments. It's about you, your style, your space, your way. Whether you DIY or want the pros to handle it all, you'll have the confidence of knowing it's done right. From free expert design help to our 100% satisfaction guarantee, everything we do is made to fit your life and your windows. Because at Blinds.com, the only thing we treat better than windows is you.
Shop Blinds.com Labor Day Mega Sale happening now. Save up to 50% site-wide plus a free measure. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Media Podcast Network presents This is Protecting America. Now, here's Emmy-winning journalist Rita Cosby.
And welcome to another edition of Protecting America. I'm Rita Cosby. So where is the Russia-Ukraine war headed now? And will President Trump be able to achieve peace, especially with Vladimir Putin leading Russia? Well, joining us now is someone who understands Putin well. Rebekah Koffler is a Russian-born U.S. intelligence expert who served as a Russian doctrine and strategy specialist in the Defense Intelligence Agency. She is also the author of a powerful book, which is called Putin's Playbook: Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. And Rebekah, it is so great to have you here on the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you for having me, Rita. I'm so excited to finally be together with you and your awesome audience tonight.
Tell us about Putin and why is he so dangerous?
Putin is a very interesting individual. He is a former, and the former being, of course, in quotes, KGB intelligence operative. And there's no such thing as a former intelligence KGB operative. He spent his entire KGB career recruiting and running spy networks in Eastern Germany. He also witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union that he called the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. And that's whom President Donald J. Trump, is dealing with. And Trump vowed on his campaign trail to end this Russia-Ukraine conflict. It's extremely complicated, Rita, and I'm so grateful that you are dedicated the time to unpacking this very complicated issue. And unfortunately, the rest of the media is just simplifying the issue. Russia, Putin bad, Ukraine, Zelensky good, but there's a lot to it, and we need to give President Trump a little more time to untangle this extremely tight knot with Putin, the former KGB officer.
Do you believe President Trump has now sort of figured out Putin a little more? Because on one hand, he says, yeah, he talks a good game, and I think it's good that at least they're communicating. But then he also says, and then I hang up and my wife tells me, oh, they just bombed a village or a hospital. He seems to be aware that he's playing with someone who is playing all sides.
Exactly. No. President Trump, unfortunately, has not figured it out, and it's not his fault necessarily because President Trump was set up by the Biden administration in a conundrum, and unfortunately, his advisors don't quite have the depth of understanding of the adversary. So Sun Tzu, who's the ancient Chinese military strategist, taught us that you have to know your adversary and your opponent, and the American side does not know the Russian side, and was painlessly obvious in the Alaska summit. President Trump assembled a formidable team. Rubio, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, Scott Bessent, who is President Trump's secret weapon on economic warfare, and the rest of the team. But none of them speak Russian. None of them have the deep understanding of how Putin thinks Russian warfighting strategy. In contrast to that, Putin brought 3 seasoned operatives who not only speak near native level of English, minus the accent, of course, but also have decades and decades worth of experience living in the United States, understanding how Americans think, how Americans fight the war. They have deep social networks, and that is why Putin has been able to kind of delay the negative consequences that President Trump threatened, such as secondary sanctions, while keeping President Trump just interested enough, because Putin understands that Trump does not want to be a loser. President Trump likes to win. He made that campaign promise. He's keeping him in the game, signaling to him just believable enough that peace is just around the corner. But no, in my intelligence assessment, it is not achievable, unfortunately, until the U.S. team starts doing the work on the Russians or on Putin.
And what do they need to do? What does the U.S. team need to do to really ramp it up against Putin?
Sure. So the first and foremost, they need to understand Russia's way of war. And second, they need to understand Putin's thinking. How do the Russians fight, right? And I see a lot of, in the U.S. media, it's like they're mocking the Russians. Oh, the Russians are tactically incompetent. They cannot win the Donbass in 14 years. Well, you have to understand how the Russians fight. The Russians traditionally fight what is called in the intelligence business and warfare, a war of attrition. What is a war of attrition? It's a relentless attrition of manpower and weaponry. The Russians have not only 3 times more people to throw into the meat grinder than Ukrainians, they also have so many more weapons because the Putin transitioned his military economy, Russian military economy, on a wartime footing 7 years prior to the invasion. So currently, Russia produces more military hardware in 3 months than the entire European contingent produces in 1 year. And we, the United States, severely depleted our weapons assets to dangerous levels. So you have to understand something that I've been saying on national TV for 3 years. And that's why I'm not invited in most of them except yours because they don't want to hear the truth. There's a thing called combat potential. From combat potential standpoint, Ukrainian victory is mathematically impossible. How so? Combat potential is calculated as a combination of the size of the armed forces, the size of the weapons arsenal, the military-industrial complex's ability to scale up production to the final point of the war and defense economic. By those parameters, Russia beats not only Ukraine, but it beats Europe as well. And so that's what the Team Trump needs to know. And then the second thing that Team Trump needs to know is how Putin operates. And just to save us time, I would just direct Team Trump on the recent analytic piece that I wrote for the British Telegraph that explains how Putin has been able to leverage his expertise in judo, a Japanese martial art, in asset handling, because he's an intelligence operative, and also a Cold War psychological warfare concept called reflection control to string President Trump along while trying to make him angry. That's what they need to know. They need to do their homework.
Mint is still $15 a month for premium wireless. And if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 15 reasons why you should. 1, it's $15 a month. 2, seriously, it's $15 a month. 3, no big contrast. 4, I use it. 5, my mom uses it. Are you playing me off? That's what's happening, right? Okay, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, $15 per month equivalent required. New customer offer first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See mintmobile.com.
I was deep in it, gaming on Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7. Unfolding the screen made it twice as big and so immersive, I kinda lost myself. Might have trolled a little too close to the sun. Someone in the chat told me to touch grass, so I took my Z Fold 7 outside and kept playing. Still won, got a tan, and a nice little reset. Powerful processor, realistic graphics, you stay locked in, streak stays alive. Can your phone do that?
The new Galaxy Z Fold 7. Get yours at Samsung.com.
You know, that's fascinating, his background, too. The other thing, and you understand this all too well, Rebekah Koffler, he doesn't care, Putin doesn't care how many Russians are killed. I mean, it's different than what we're obviously experiencing in the United States if something were to happen with us. Putin could care less. He's a dictator. He's a thug. So the losses, he doesn't feel. It's more of his ego and his end game, like you talked about, even sort of bringing back, the old Soviet Union. He's a man on a mission, right?
Absolutely. You got it. You nailed it 100%. The only thing is, Rita, it's not just Putin, it's Russia's way of war. The Russians are 100% behind him. They don't care about casualties. Think about it this way, like the Russian tolerance for casualties is much higher than U.S. tolerance for casualties. U.S. way of war is very precise and it's focused on saving lives, right? When we go in, whether it's like Afghanistan, Iraq, whatever, we try to do pinprick, precise targeting that limits especially civilian casualties. Well, the Russians don't care. They want to achieve the mission. And if you look at the World War II, they incurred 25+ million casualties. Okay? So during the Petersburg, which is the hometown of Putin himself, there were thousands and thousands of lives lost just building that city. The Russians just have a different relationship between life and death, and security trumps any kind of other consideration. So when people say, secondary sanctions, economic warfare is going to compel Putin to end the war, my interpretation is like, no, whatever hurt it might inflict on Russia, the Russians have high tolerance. They're able to tighten their belt in order to achieve their security objective, which is to keep Ukraine in Russia's strategic security perimeter and keep it away from NATO rather than giving it up to NATO.
It's extraordinary, too. How different would Putin react if the U.S. ramps up, say, secondary sanctions, or if they allow Ukraine to use these long-range missiles? How would that change the game?
So first I will address the long-range missiles. So they attack them. President Biden, during his term, he authorized Zelensky to use ATACMS to strike deep inside Russia. And regretfully, he placed, with that decision, President Trump in a conundrum because Zelensky turned around and he took Biden on his offer, and Ukrainians struck strategic nuclear triad, the delivery systems, the Russian bombers, nuclear bombers, with that. And so that demonstrated to Putin. Remember, Rita, in your audience, Putin does not think like an American. And that's like the grave misunderstanding that a lot of Western analysts, including in like Biden's administration and others, they think that Putin is acting based on Western logic, American logic. No, Putin thinks like a Russian, and he thinks like a KGB operative and a typical Russian dictator. So that just demonstrates to Putin he has to eliminate the threat of Ukraine. And so that's why he is going to continue. President Trump is working in a very untenable kind of situation that he's trying to untangle to demonstrate to Putin that peace is a viable option, but there's no trust. And that is because whoever was before him, Biden, Obama, they did certain things to place President Trump in a checkmate.
Also, let's think about the rhetoric, too. Not only just did they put him in a checkmate, but it seemed like they were just prolonging the war. They weren't giving Ukraine all the ammunition they need. They sent a message, I think, of weakness. And I also think, Rebekah, too, I always think when I think of Joe Biden, I think of him saying, well, if it's a minor incursion. And that just was, the cat's meow for Putin, who's on the other end with thousands upon thousands of troops amassing at the border. He essentially gave Putin the green light.
Exactly. He did that. And Putin read it as a green light. And Putin himself, during the Alaska meeting, he told President Trump that he wouldn't have invaded if President Trump were in charge. Why would he have not invaded? Not many people know that because President Trump was smeared with all that collusion nonsense, right? That was completely a setup orchestrated by the deep state and Clapper, Comey, Brennan. Triad, I would say, who betrayed the American people. But President Trump pursued in his first term the most robust anti-Russia policy. And one of the things, I don't have time to explain all the 5 things. I actually wrote a piece, it's either on Newsweek or on the Federalist, right? That President Trump is the only U.S. president that Putin fears, right? Where I outlined 5 things. I'm just going to, for the sake of time, mention one thing. So the whole Russian strategy hinges, the plan B, on nuclear use. Escalate to de-escalate, popping a tactical nuclear warhead in Ukraine to make U.S. and NATO forces stand down and not intervene. Well, President Trump understood that very well during his first term, and he authorized the U.S. Navy, not just authorized, he directed them. He said, y'all need to develop the same capability as sea-launched tactical nuclear cruise missile, nuclear-tipped, that would neutralize the Russian strategy. And guess what happens when Biden came to power? He canceled that program. So it's very complicated. President Trump is trying to manage this whole situation, but unfortunately, there's a lot of pressure on him because he's promised in his campaign to do it in 24 hours. Well, it turns out a lot more because his advisors didn't really explain to him, Rita, that it's so much more complicated. So there's pressure now, but what needs to happen is he needs to be given time and expertise, and someone on his team needs to do their homework on how to counter the Russians, because the Russians, they're not Iranians, they're not North Koreans. You can't just wiggle your way out of the situation. You actually have to develop a counter strategy, and that requires deep understanding of your adversary.
So where do you see it going? And is this going to be a back and forth? The last, obviously, after the big meeting in Alaska, then Trump said, well, I'm hoping Zelensky and Putin are going to meet. Now he's saying, I'm not so sure. Do you think that Putin first and Zelensky will meet? And do you think there'll be the, quote, trilateral meeting soon after that, Rebekah?
No, Rita, unfortunately, there's going to be no trilateral meeting or bilateral meeting. Here's why. And again, President Trump advisors need to explain that to him, because President Trump can't just know everything, right? He's scoring victories domestically. Like, the man doesn't sleep. There's only so many hours in a day, so he needs support. So they need to give them intellectual firepower that he needs to deal with this conflict. Why will Putin not meet with Zelensky? Well, Zelensky's term expired in May. He is an illegitimate president as far as the Russians are concerned. Putin does not meet with illegitimate heads of state. And one of the reasons, in addition to legally, is just not whatever Zelensky can possibly sign off to, it's not going to be legally enforceable. And Putin, in addition to being like having a PhD in economics, he is a constitution. He's an attorney, right? He knows inside and out, not just the Russian constitution, but Ukraine. So the Russians are paranoid that if they sign on to the deal, Ukraine is going to turn around and say, oh, this president was illegitimate. We don't abide by any of that. Okay, so there's going to be none of that. Putin is not going to meet with that. So President Trump, it looks like he's going to walk away just like he said a few weeks ago. If he determines in the first 2 minutes that the deal is unachievable, he's just going to tell them, okay, y'all just keep fighting. I'm going to focus on my domestic affairs. That's unfortunately what's going to happen. Putin is holding the upper hand in Ukraine because of that combat potential that I explained, because he thinks that he can drive a very, very hard ball, and he's prepared to fight a multi-year war of attrition. He increased the size of the Russian military to above the constitutionally allowable limit, right? It's above the 1.5 million right now, second only to the Chinese, which is also 1.5, U.S. military 1.3 million, right? So, but it only matters, like, for the point, like, if there's an actual kinetic war, right? The reason why Putin is doing it is to demonstrate to us he can fight a protracted war, and Ukraine simply does not have sufficient amount of people to throw into the meat grinder, and no Europeans either. Because the Europeans, out of about 50, I think there's about between 44 to 50 European countries, right, in the world, depending on how you count. But only 9 of them have mandatory conscription.
Gatorade is the #1 proven electrolyte blend designed to hydrate better than water. So you can lose more sweat and raise your game. Gatorade. Is it in you?
Building a portfolio with Fidelity Basket Portfolios is kind of like making a sandwich. It's as simple as picking your stocks and ETFs, sort of like your meats and other topics, and managing it as one big, juicy investment. Now that's pretty good. Learn more at fidelity.com/baskets. Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. Member NYSE SIPC.
This episode is brought to you by Buick. Buick certified service technicians are factory trained to fit your vehicle with the tires specifically developed for it. And with our tire price match guarantee, you get the best fit for the best deal. Buick. Exceptional by design. Available on select eligible tire brands at participating dealers only. Offer ends 12/31/2025. Terms apply. See dealer for complete details. Visit Buick.com/service to learn more.
Running a business means I wear lots of hats. Luckily, when it's time to put on my hiring hat, I can count on LinkedIn to make it easy. I can post a job for free or pay to promote it and get 3 times more qualified candidates. Imagine finding your next great hire in 24 hours. 86% of small businesses do. With LinkedIn, I can also easily share my job with my network. No other job site lets me do that. Post your free job at linkedin.com/achieve. That's linkedin.com/achieve. Terms and conditions apply.
The United States does not have mandatory conscription either. And the recent National Security Commission designated, or rather like made a conclusion that if the United States were to go to war with what the Pentagon calls near-peer competitors, such as Russia or China, we would need within weeks, not months, weeks, to invoke mandatory draft. And that goes counter to President Trump's policy. He promised them his campaign trail no more foreign wars. And Putin knows all of that, all of those conundrums that President Trump and that Biden's people put him at. And so that's why we're in this situation right now. And time and patience need to be given to President Trump to resolve, or rather manage this. Not everything can be resolved because these are like centuries-old problems, right? You can't just resolve. So we need to give him time.
No, that's a great point. I like how you say time to manage, because it is such a complex issue. Well, by the way, everybody, be sure to subscribe and share this really interesting podcast. Rebekah Koffler, you are terrific. You got to come back on again soon. You have such great depth of knowledge and great perspective. And boy, are these issues timely. Thank you so much for joining us, Rebekah.
And of course, thank you for having me, and God bless everyone, Rita Cosby, and all your listeners.
And everybody, I'll be back soon with another great edition of Protecting America. And of course, you can catch me every weeknight, 10 p.m. to midnight on the legendary WABC Radio. This is Rita Cosby, and thanks for all you do to protect America.